Okay, we're live.
Okay.
Welcome. So, welcome to the Hannah Judson Beat. I'm really happy today to have Cindy Shapiro as my guest. We have a lot of things in store to talk about today, and I'm looking forward to digging into to. Uh, Oops, sorry, I'm looking at my notes. I'm looking forward to learning more about Cindy's work. Cindy is, well, she can tell you better than I, but she is a musician, a composer, a librettist. You've written several operas, and you've got a lot of things in the works. But let me just ask you first, where are you right now?
Right now, I am in Portugal, just south of Porto. I'm in a region called Villanova de Gaia, and you can't see, I'm looking just over my computer at the waves of the Atlantic crashing over. It's just a beautiful day. And of course, we're in heavy lockdown here in Portugal because, it's like the worst in the world, right? Everywhere I go, it's, the worst in the world for COVID. But anyway, I'm in an Airbnb in just south of Porto, about 15 minutes south of Porto by car. And yeah, right on the water. It's just stunning here in Villanova de Gaia. Love
Yeah.
it here. Yeah.
So, how long have you been there?
Let's see. I've been in Villanova de Gaia for about a month and a half, I would say. Yeah, since mid December, something like that. Late December. Yeah.
Okay. And where were you coming from?
So my husband and I left Los Angeles just before the election. We had already voted. We voted early. And, I had a premonition, didn't take a genius. I had a premonition. There might be some violence between the election and the inauguration. Well, let me just put it this way. In the area that I live in, which is the San Fernando Valley, there were people riding up and down like Ventura Boulevard with like AR-15s, and it just didn't feel safe. So we decided that we were first going to fly to the UK. This is just pre-Brexit, so you could fly to the UK, and then from the UK you could fly into Portugal. You couldn't fly directly to Portugal because the EU wasn't allowing any citizens from the US to come in. And we came to the UK first. We had a couple of reasons for going there first. One was, yes, you could side door your way into Portugal. But the other was, we have a daughter who lives in London. She goes to an acting conservatory there. She goes to the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama. So she's in her second year there. And we went to London. We watched the returns from London. It was, a little terrifying at first. And then, of course, we had to quarantine for a couple of weeks, and we would stand sort of outside and wave to our daughter from our the porch outside. And then after our quarantine, we spent a little time with her, and then we had to get like a fit to fly. We flew into Portugal, and the reason we decided to, hi, Ellen Walters. And then we had to have our fit to fly, and we chose Portugal because Portugal is the third safest country in the world behind Iceland and New Zealand, and it's very welcoming of people who want to become, expats. And I've always wanted to live in Europe, and we were just interested in sort of exploring. So we flew into Lisbon with our negative COVID tests in hand, and then we started kind of just Airbnb-ing our way around Portugal. And for me, I'm just like really a city person, and we've always wanted to live near the beach. But I was like, if we're going to live near the beach, we have to find a place near the beach, near one of the cities. So we were looking in like Cascais, and we were looking in Estoril, places like that are near Lisbon. And like nothing felt quite right. Then we came up to Porto, and nothing was kind of feeling quite right there until we came to Villanova de Gaia, which is this place where we're in now. It's just south of Porto, and it's just like, for us, it's just this magnificently magical place. It's perfectly maintained, bike paths for 30 or 40 miles, and then right along the beach. And then it turns, it turns from the Atlantic and it goes to the Douro River. And it's just, there's estuaries. And then there are these beautiful boardwalks that go along the water. You can just walk for miles and miles and miles, kilometers and kilometers and kilometers. Sorry, I have to fix that. And it's just perfectly maintained. And so we decided to go ahead and buy a place by the beach. So we're in the early stages of signing our promissory. Dealing with real estate here is a whole other. We've had to learn really a lot about buying real estate here in Portugal. But anyway, we're in the process of purchasing an apartment here, and that apartment is really beach property. I mean, it's right there. You're looking at it. It's right on the beach. But get in your car, 15 minutes, you're in Porto. This beautiful European, it's really a city. It's just gorgeous. And we're kind of plugged into this great expat community. I have a friend from my New York, my rock and roll, like New York days. I knew her years ago. And she used to come to my gigs in New York, and she's Sharon Cohen Campbell. And she's just this wonderful human who's like the mayor of the expat Porto community. She's just plugged us right into this cool group of lovely people, very welcoming. And some of them are expats, some of them are Portuguese. And the Portuguese people are just the most lovely, welcoming, kind. I love it here. We are going back to LA fairly soon, but we're planning on spending part of the year here, part of the year in LA, back and forth. That's our goal. That's our mission. So anyway, that's where I am, Portugal.
Well, you painted a beautiful picture. I think we're all thinking, how do I get to go to Portugal? I mean,
why aren't I here?
I know. So you mentioned sort of that you have a friend there, that there is an expat scene. Is there sort of a creative scene there that you've plugged into or that you're aware of? Could you imagine sort of being in Portugal and working and making, or will you continue to keep your studio and your creative life in LA and then come to Portugal to relax?
No, I plan on making work here for sure. I mean, so far since I've been here, I've met musicians, I've met choreographers, I've definitely met people in the creative community. And, I would say 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, we went into full lockdown, and we were in mini lockdown before that. So I haven't been able to sort of, make as many connections as I would like, but I already feel like there's definitely, there's a beautiful music hall in Porto, and there's people who I haven't met, people who I know people who play in the symphony here. I would definitely like to, when I finish this third opera, I would like to try to stage it here in Porto, starting here. So I definitely see myself making work here. So no, I don't see myself having to be in Los Angeles. Not at all. Yeah.
That's really exciting. That kind of just the physical shift of geography changes a lot.
It certainly does. Yeah.
So is there anything around you that it's been weird because you've been in lockdown and everything is different right now, but is there anything there that you see inspires you that you're like, yeah, I'm going to be working with that, or I'm going to be referencing that, or is that maybe to come?
Not yet. Well, okay, so let me backtrack and say, one of the things that I have a heavy background in that might not be obvious because most people are like, oh, musician, composer, librettist, blah, blah, blah. But really I have this super duper heavy background in tech. And I love tech. I'm just kind of like I can go down this rabbit hole and never come out. Like, it makes my husband crazy. Like, I'm going to go write code now. And he's like, okay, I won't see her for 2 weeks. And I still write code, and I keep myself up to date. I write in JavaScript, and I just keep myself very current as much as I can with tech. Yeah. And so I met you 10 years ago when I was writing my first opera in Paris. And I was there under the auspices of the French Ministry of Culture. It was a very wonderful, wonderful experience. And I was there writing my first opera about the myth of Psyche and Eros. And I was there at Cité Internationale des Arts. And I was there really composer librettist. That was my whole thing. And then my second opera was about the writer Anais Nin. So all my operas are about female heroes. And then I started working on my third opera. I don't want to say what the subject matter is quite yet, but anyway, I was working on my third opera, and part of the concept of this third opera was supposed to be a live opera, fully on stage opera, and one of the aspects of this opera is that there's this hallucinogenic portion of the opera where we were going to do AR, augmented reality. We were going to use video projection mapping. So I had a projection. I had a light form projection mapper that I had already bought, and I had a place where I was going to do this work in Los Angeles called the Rattle. And it was at Max Sennett Studios, and I'm an artist with the Rattle. It's a whole other story. I won't go into it quite yet. But it was this wonderful, like, projection mapping is this thing where I won't go into that either. Anyway, it's this wonderful technology. You want me to go into AR?
Yeah, a little bit. I'm curious. Yeah, a little bit.
So AR is kind of like, when you take a video and you project a video onto a 3D surface that has let's say you project a video onto a person, and it kind of warps onto the person, and you can see the video is like a two-dimensional thing, and it's warping onto the person. And the video looks really funny because it's warping onto the shape of the person. So what projection mapping does is, before it projects the video, it takes a little 3D snapshot of the shape of the person. Then it pre-warps that video, so that when it projects, it's almost like a tattoo onto the 3D object, so that it maps perfectly onto the 3D shapes that are in the space. Wow. And so it's this very surreal looking thing. And so we were going to go into, the opera was going to be this very kind of like stately, interesting thing about a female character from history. And we were going to be going along in her narrative, and then suddenly we were going to go into this sort of hallucinogenic moments, and the whole theater was going to go into this hallucinogenic mapping thing and then we were going to add, like, it was going to be symphonic instruments, and we were going to add rock elements and electronica, and we were going to make it very hallucinogenic. And I was pitching this opera to people, and they were going, wow. And I said, yeah. So I want people to say, like, hey, let's go drop acid and go see this like opera. And what was cool was that, so I was doing this work in LA, and I've friends who sing with the LA Opera, and we were going to sort of contract with some of those singers and bring them in to sing. And I had this whole thing set up, and then COVID. And then my daughter got COVID. My daughter had COVID in London, and she had a very bad case of it. Luckily, she didn't have to go to the hospital. It was terrible. I didn't eat or sleep for about 7 weeks while she was sick. Okay. And so during that period, the Rattle, who was this group that was sort of like, they're a group that was sort of helping me develop my opera. They got in touch with me, and they said, hey, we'd like to put you together with somebody who wants to talk to you about your AR and this projection mapping thing, and they want to talk to you about it. And I was like, I don't want to talk to anybody about my AR. My daughter's sick, and I don't want to talk about my opera. I was just, no. But I sort of like dragged my butt over to Zoom and made myself get on this call with this woman. She was lovely. And she had some ideas about where to place the projectors and how to make it all work and stuff. And it was helpful. At the end of the conversation, she said, hey, Cindy, what are you going to do if, here comes Siri again. I don't know why she's up. who cares? Go away, Siri. She said, hey, Cindy, what are you going to do if like live performance never happens again? And I went, what? My whole brain just went like that. And then I said, oh, I know what I would do. I would do a VR opera. And then I hung up Zoom and I called my partner. So I have a partner who I develop these operas with, Janet Roston. She's a director, choreographer. And we develop the stories together. Then we kind of create the narrative, outline together. I go off and I write the music and I toss the music over to her and she stages these, she does these gorgeous, amazing stagings, these beautiful, it's beautiful choreography. We build these things together. And I called her and I said, hey, what do you think of this idea about doing like a VR opera? And she was like, what even are you saying? Like she's not a tech person, but I was a game developer. I was a game developer for years and years and years. So this was like a very natural, jump for me to make. And so we talked through it and we decided that this was what we were going to do. So since, I don't know, May, I think, we've been developing the first ever VR opera. And so it's been fantastic. So I've been so what's inspiring me is sitting at my computer and going, zzz, like really unpacking like Unreal Engine and unpacking, facial recognition software and really understanding like rigging for characters. And like, I've just gone down this intense tech rabbit hole, which has been so much fun, and composing.
Wow.
Yeah. So I've been doing both of those things. And then Janet, my partner, Janet Roston, my brilliant partner, has been working with motion capture, with a dancer doing motion capture in a motion capture suit. So like we will have these Zoom calls where I'm in Portugal, my partner's in Los Angeles, our VR developer's in London, he's with a dancer in London, she's wearing a mocap suit. We're puppeting these beautiful characters that we've developed that are going to be within our VR opera that are dancing. And they're these kind of like the art style that we've developed is kind of very gestural. It's very drawn looking so that it's fully 3D so that the user's experience is going to be like, you're not sitting in an audience watching an opera. You're inside the opera with the characters watching them do this story all around you. You can walk up to the musicians and watch them play.
Wow.
The closer you get to the string section, the louder they are. You can see the music on the stands. Like that's what we're doing. It's the first ever thing like that. So that's what we're doing.
So let's take a pause for a second. I want to just take a pause. Welcome to the Hannah Judson Beat. For those of you who have just joined us or joined us earlier, today's guest is Cindy Shapiro. For those of you who are here with us live, feel free to ask Cindy questions as you think of them. We're keeping an eye on the chat section. I've posted in the chat a few links if you want to do a little bit more research into Cindy's work, her website, the Incorrigible Entertainment website also, and then links to the websites of two of her earlier operas. But I thought this would be a good moment to share the video about Incorrigible. Yeah. Okay, so
that's my company.
Do you want to? Can you introduce the video? Or shall I just
tee it up? Sure. I mean, so I have this company called Incorrigible Entertainment. It's the company that I co-own with my partner, Janet Roston. Janet is the director choreographer. I'm the composer librettist, and we build the shows together. And we call it Incorrigible Entertainment because it's shows about incorrigible women by incorrigible women, Janet and me. That's really it.
Hi, my name is I'm a composer, librettist of operas about female heroes.
Hi, I'm Janet Roston. I'm a director choreographer.
I was a software engineer specializing in artificial emotion and interactive fiction. As a performer, I started out diving off stages at CBGB's. Then I was a cantor at Wilshire Boulevard Temple.
My background was originally in dance. I went to UCLA and got my BA and master's in dance.
Incorrigible Entertainment is a company that I started with Janet Roston to create stage works about women who cannot be contained.
We create in the theater stories about powerful women who live their own lives
That did not follow the rules, that had something to say.
and really forge their own way.
I love working with Janet. She and I tend to come together, create a spine of a story, and then go off separately.
We're always kind of surprised and delighted in what we've come up with.
Then to see it come to life on stage is an astonishing experience.
Our production about Anais Nin opened to worldwide success with standing ovations in Paris, Avignon, and Casablanca, Morocco.
Anais is the epitome of an incorrigible woman.
She lived her life freely as a woman in a man's world.
She just did whatever she wanted from day one until she died.
What we're working on now is something that Cindy brought to the table, and it's the story of Hildegard of Bingen.
Hildegard of Bingen was a 12th century polymath nun. She lit up the world at a time when women had no power. If there was such a thing as a feminist in the 12th century, she was it. She was a builder, she was a preacher, she was a composer, she was a rock star of her era. And Janet and I are in the process of building a huge opera around her. We're going to have projection mapping.
We're going to just immerse the audience in visuals.
It's going to be a combination of symphony and rock band.
We want the audience to feel the visions of Hildegard.
We're going to resurrect this woman and reinstate her proper place in history through this work.
We're looking to do large-scale productions.
We have 3 new operas coming up. We have Anais going on tour. We are doing Psyche 2.0. We're very excited about the future, and we would like to appeal to other women in other media
Who are making films, television, podcasts.
to join us and other incorrigible women and experience the power of theater.
Wow. Wow. That was a great introduction. I love the word incorrigible. And I have to say that once when I was a child, I was told by a figure of authority that I was incorrigible. And it kind of like it made me feel awful. And then once I realized what a great word that was, that I could, take it and own it, I'm happy to have been labeled incorrigible.
Embrace it. You're one of us. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
wow. So that is a beautiful introduction to really an amazing collaboration with Janet. And so did you know her for years and years before you started collaborating?
No. Mm-mm. No, we were, so when I was first working on Psyche, we did I guess what they would call like a banker's audition. I don't know. It was kind of like a thing where you sort of like stand up a couple of pieces from the show and you bring people in to listen and look at it. And she was in the audience for that. And then a couple of people afterwards were sort of like drinking in the lobby. And a couple of people came up to us at that event and said, you two need to know each other now. And then we went out for coffee and she said, hey, why don't you send me everything you've ever written? And I said, oh, okay, I could do that. So I sent her, and I had like a pretty big catalog of stuff. But it was like stuff from various bands that I'd been in, and then stuff that was like my own stuff. And I love the work that I'd done with my bands. I mean, I had 2 really killer bands in New York City when I was younger. Really kind of like that downtown sort of alternative shit that was so cool in the era. And I really worked with some very, very gifted musicians in that period. And then I had some stuff that I'd written myself. And she came back to me after she really listened to like everything. And then she came back to me and she said, so I listened to this stuff that was like the card game. I listened to the stuff that was 2.5D. And then I listened to the Cindy Shapiro stuff. And she goes, honestly, I really sparked to this stuff by Cindy Shapiro. She goes, what are these things? What's this song about? What's this song about? I said, oh, I was walking by my bookshelf one day, just bored and looking for a book to read. And I realized that I had a couple of books on my shelf that I'd never really cracked open. There's a bookstore in New York City that's like this awesome bookstore called The Strand. And I think that I hope I get this right. I think that their little tagline is, 8 miles of books. Like, they have just tons and tons of books there. And I had gone in there at some point and bought this book about Henry Miller and Anais Nin. And it was about their love affair. And I really didn't know. I kind of knew a little bit about Henry Miller because everyone knows at least a little bit about Henry Miller. But I didn't really know anything about Anais Nin. And it was their love letters. And I had bought that book, I don't know, maybe 10 years before that. And I pulled it off my shelf and opened it and gone, what's this? Oh, look, a book from The Strand that I never really read. And then I sat down and I read it and I was like, whoa, this is fascinating. It was their love letters. And it was like, Henry and I just met, Louis Buñuel at the Café blah, blah, blah. And it was like Paris in between the wars. It was the most fascinating period, in the most fascinating place. And I was riveted by their story. So I started writing music around that. And Janet said, what are these songs about? And I said, oh, this is about the love affair between Henry Miller and Anais Nin between the wars. And she went, let's build a show around this music. This is cool. And so that's what we did. We started building a show around Nin and Nin and Miller, but then it really became more about Nin.
Yeah.
And Janet's concept was, what if we had like one singer that was Nin and then one dancer that was Nin? And so what we ended up doing was, it was really, I don't know, it was very interesting. It was like one kind of like rock singer she sang with a microphone the whole night. So it wasn't the thing where it was like, the Time Life operator thing where it was like, she just had like one, head mic. She had a handheld mic, and we called her on Eternal Anais. She was like Anais Nin returned from the dead to defend herself against this smearing that took place. Somebody in the 90s wrote a biography about Nin that just took her down. Yeah. Basically, it was like slut shaming. It was a word that we didn't have in the 90s, but they slut shamed her in the 90s, and so badly that her publisher pulled all her books from their catalog, and she was done. She was called a monster, and she was done. And it was because she had lived basically the life Henry Miller had lived, only she was a woman. Yeah. And so Nin comes back from the dead at the beginning of that show, and she's singing this, and she's singing to the audience, I'm going to tell you my life story. And there's all these newspaper things, newspaper headings that come up on projections behind her. And she says, I'm going to show you my life story, and you can be the judge. You'll decide who I am. You'll see the whole thing, and then you'll decide. And we contacted the Nin Trust and said, we're going to do a story on her. Can we use her handwriting and from some of her journals, and can we use her likeness, her voice? And they said, explain your project. We explained it, and they said, yeah, sure. So it turns out that Nin's whole archive is at UCLA. So it was like around the corner from us. So we went to her collection. We had them pull certain things from the collection. And we went to the library, and they allowed us to take photographs of like the page from her diary where she met Henry Miller. I'm singing. I've met Henry Miller, and we projected that huge behind the performers. So anyway, we had this one singer, Anais, who was spinning out the tale through singing, through music. And then we had one dancer, Anais, who was dancing the story. And she was within the story, the tale. And then the singer, Anais, was narrating basically through song. And then once in a while, the singer, Anais, would sort of permeate the tale and jump in and dance with everybody. And then we had 6 other dancers, I think, who were also dancing inside the tale. So we had a dancer who was Henry Miller, raging sexual beast, and then we had like a few other dancers who would be like, people in the cafes. One of them would be like, Picasso or whomever. And then we took them all the way through Nin's life when she was a bigamist. She had 2 husbands. And so she had this thing that she called the trapeze. She had one husband in LA and one husband in New York, and we took her all the way through that. And I had a piece called the trapeze, and she would be kind of coming from one to the other, and Janet choreographed this whole thing. And somebody had said to me at one point, I mean, Nin's really well known for her erotica. And she's kind of a proto-feminist, Nin. Really well known for her erotica. And somebody said to me, hey, you know, it better be pretty sexy, this show. And so one of Nin's most famous books is called Delta of Venus. And so Janet and I decided, like, one of the most important pieces in the show is going to be a piece called Delta of Venus. And I think if you go to AnnaEastNinUnbound.com, I think there's like a clip from that on there. So, you know, I was having a pretty easy time kind of like writing the pieces, getting them to Janet, shaping the show. Delta of Venus was like a hard nut to crack, as it were. And I wrote, it took me 18, like I have not cracked this one. It was hard for me to like figure it out. And I got to the 18th one. I'm like, this is it. And actually, it's my favorite one in the whole show. Toss it over the wall to Janet, and she's like, she knows exactly what she wants to do with it, and she has this perfect take on how she wants that to, you know, lay out on the stage, and it is the sexiest. It's so cool. It was just this perfect, sexy, interesting take on, you know, Nin's. We sort of like do a couple of pieces from the book. We sort of like do a little taste of it from the book, and then how she came to write that book. I mean, basically the way Nin came to write that book was that unlike today, it was kind of hard to get your hands on porn. And so a broker came to Nin and said, I have this client, he would like some porn. He'll pay you $1 a page. Can you please kick out some pornography for this guy? And she said, yeah, absolutely. So she starts calling all her friends and saying, like, her friends were people like, you know, Robert De Niro's parents were her friends. I mean, his mother was a poet, his father was like an actor or something. And she had all these like very interesting friends in Paris. And so she starts bringing in all these people and saying, tell me all of your crazy sex stories. And she starts like sort of shaping stories around that, and then handing through this broker these sex stories, and then sending them to whomever this client was, and the collector, they called him. And she gets word through the broker from the collector, less poetry, more sex. So that was kind of like the break in the song, less poetry, more sex. So we did a whole thing. It was sort of like our Joe LaRue, who did our video projections, had this kind of like real Barbara Kruger style, like huge, like huge lettering, like less poetry, more sex, like big letters behind the dancers. And they were all ripping off their clothes and dancing and stuff. And we ended up we took that show for a month. In the summer of 2017, we took it to the Avignon Theater Festival, and it was really exciting. And then somebody from the Moroccan Theater Festival saw us there and came backstage and said, oh, we would really like you to open the Morocco Theater Festival, like the King of Morocco's, you know, Casablanca Theater Festival. And we went, really? This show in Morocco? This show where people are like showing their nipples and stuff? Seriously? And they said, no, yeah, we want you. And Janet kept saying, I'll believe it when we have tickets and a hotel room booked. And they brought us in 2018. And Janet kept saying, I'm going to re-choreograph a couple of things where there's like less hip thrust on this, one less pump on this scene. And I'm like, she's the choreographer. I'm gonna like defer to her. And the guy who booked us came in. It was a 700-seat theater, and we were opening this week-long theater festival in Casablanca. I mean, people are walking around in full-on burqas, you know, in Casablanca. And our cast was like, they had figured out that they could lock their dressing room doors from the inside. And we were worried. We just didn't know what to expect. It's a really religious, community. And the guy who booked us came in and said, do not change any of the choreography. The only thing I will say is the sheer bra, just change that into an opaque bra. I don't want to see her nipples. That's it. Wow. And so Janet, who I adore, but I sometimes call her Mary Darkness instead of Mary Sunshine, she kept going, they're all going to they're going to go out for their smoke on the intermission, and they're not going to come back, and they're going to tomato us, and we're going to have 5 people clapping at the very end. And, and she and I were running crew that night. So I was running audio, she was calling lights. And sometimes at the end of a show, she and I would go up and bow at the end. And she goes, we're not bowing at the end of this. They're going to hate it. They're just going to hate us. We're going to be, it's going to be terrible. This is a very sexy show. So, and the first act is sort of sexy because Nin's cheating on her husband with Miller in the first half of the show, but the second half is really sexy. So, intermission comes, everybody goes out for the smoke, everyone comes back. I'm like, seems okay. And then we get through the second half, and the very end of the show is the thesis statement where the singer sings the following line: a woman should live her life free as men. She's basically saying, if Henry Miller can live this way, so can I. And 700 fists went into the air. Wow. And Jen and I, our jaws were on the floor. We couldn't believe it. And then the bow music came up, and the whole audience was on its feet. And she turns to me and she goes, let's go. We go running down the aisle. We jump on the stage. We're bowing with our cast. And then we go off stage, and it's a very sweaty show. It's a lot of heavy dancing in that show. So everyone's all sweaty, and it's very moist scene backstage. We're all hugging and crying. And then they're screaming and yelling for us and stamping and screaming and stamping. And we go running back on stage. We bow again. We go back. I think we took 3, maybe 4 curtain calls. It was very deeply emotional for this crowd. Yeah. Then we come back. Then Janet goes back off stage to kind of wrap up. She goes downstairs to pack up the costumes and the props and stuff. And I go back to deal with all of my audio gear. And there are women lining the aisles weeping.
Wow.
And they knew that I had something to do with the show. They didn't know what, because they had just seen me bow. And as I'm walking up, they're saying to me, thank you so much for bringing this show to, it's one thing to play that show in France, but it's another thing to play that show in Morocco, and they're crying and saying, thank you so much for bringing the show, to our country. And they're asking me, what did you do with the show? I said, I'm the composer. And then I'm saying to them, what do you do? Yeah. These are all women, and one of them said, I'm a composer. I don't know what to do next. Yeah. And I said, go home and write something. Yeah. And then another woman, I said, what do you do? And she goes, I'm a guitar player. And I said, so everything's to track. I said, all that guitar on the track, that was all me playing. Not a great guitarist, but I still played all the guitar on the track. And she said, oh my God. I said, go home and play guitar. It was just the most, and we were all in a WhatsApp, group, all the cast and crew, and we just, for weeks and weeks, we would text each other, are you still crying? I'm still crying. I mean, it was the most meaningful, deep thing. And just this kind of feminist kind of cri de coeur in a country that doesn't really have a lot of that. It's one thing to do that in a country as I said, France or even America, not necessarily post-Trump, but in a place where people are used to women sort of having agency. Yeah. But in a place like that, deep. It was a very deep experience.
That is really, really monumental. And that is service at the maximum, really doing something that touches people, that inspires people, and that makes change. It's not just entertainment at all. One thing I do have to say about the Aeneas opera is that it is beautiful. The music is beautiful. The dance is beautiful. So it's and it takes you into the full story also. So but it's not like in your face. It's really extraordinarily um uh I would say accessible. Would you say accessible?
We tried to honor Anais' story and her as an artist, and we tried to so the music's pretty, yeah, it's pretty accessible. I mean, look, I come from a background of like rock, and it shows. I mean, I'm also like a classically trained singer, and I have that kind of in my kit bag, but yeah, I think I think it's like, it's catchy. Like there's kind of like hooks. I mean, there's like things like that in it that I don't think I was like, I'm going to build a hook into this song. Like it wasn't necessarily sort of deliberately built that way, but it just kind of like flowed that way. And I think a lot of it was just because Nin herself is pretty inspiring. And, you know, I think that we try to choose subject matter that is inspiring that way, that draws us in. And that's part of it. It's just the women we pick to put at the center of these things speak to us and help us sort of like shape these things. It's them a lot of times.
Yeah. So that's interesting. I remember talking to you around the time that you were running the Anais show, and her presence and her story was so present in what people were talking about. And it wasn't just about her at a distance. It was with her up close, I felt.
I'm sorry, you cut out a little bit. Can you repeat that last thing? It wasn't just what?
Well, that Anais wasn't just the subject at a distance, that we were learning about her historically. She was there. She was brought into the present because it was yeah. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, we try to really dig deeply into her emotional states. You know, at each moment in her life, we try to go into her timeline, and I read, you know, every one of her. So, you know, the way her diaries were released, it's sort of an interesting tale, because I think after Anne Frank, she's probably the most famous diarist. Yeah. And she's got, you know, this sort of series of the Diary of Anais Nin, and the first set of diaries that came out really catapulted her, you know, in her lifetime as a famous person, as a famous writer. She spoke a lot at universities, and she was sort of feted and, you know, celebrated writer, and you know, wrote the foreword to this book and wrote the foreword to that book, and she was just a celebrated person. And then she died, and then what started happening was the unexpurgated versions of the diaries started coming out with the real, like what was really going on. She had gone in with like a hatchet when her diaries were first released, and there was a lot of like withheld information because she was doing naughty things. And she didn't want to hurt people. Right. Okay, to be fair, she didn't want to hurt people. So by the time that the unexpurgated diaries had come out, her husband Hugh had died, and she loved him. Yeah. She didn't want to hurt him. She loved him. And a lot of the people who would have been wounded by the full truth coming out were gone at that point. Yeah. So her second husband, who she had a bigamous relationship with, Rupert Pole, had decided he was going to put out the unexpurgated diary of Anais Nin, and he did. Henry and June was the first one that came out, and that was released as a film, and I think it came out as a book in, I want to say like 88, 89. She died in 77, and the first unexpurgated book came out in like 88, 89, something like that. And then the movie came out in like 90, and it was like Uma Thurman, I think, played June, Henry Miller's wife, June, and it was the first NC-17 movie. So it was kind of like that, sort of like just teetering on the edge of an X-rated movie. It was that first, you know, so there was some fame around that, you know. And so one of the things, and then, so those diaries started coming out, and then like all the people that were sort of in a seat of responsibility for those diaries, they all died out. And then this wonderful man, Paul Heron, kind of like took the reins of that. And Paul, so then I contacted Paul Heron and said, I needed an advisor. Would you mind being my advisor for this? And he said, sure. And he was so wonderful and so helpful. And since Paul has been involved in that world, I think he's put out like 2 or 3 more, I want to say 3 more unexpurgated diaries. So, and then they went back to her childhood diaries. So it started like from the very beginning. She started keeping the diary because she was pulled from her father, which was kind of like this origin story. She was pulled from her father when she was 11 and taken to the United States by her mother. And her mother said, you can start writing your father a letter. So she was kind of like cataloging what was happening on board ship to like draw her father in to her story and get him to like come to America and have this story and draw her father into her story. That's how the diary started. And so I read everything from the time she was a child all the way through her, everything that was like the unexpurgated story. So I was deep in her head, like all the real shit that she wrote, all the real story that had happened. And then if I had questions, or like there was a period when Paul was still editing her books, they hadn't even been released yet. And I would write to him and say, I need to know about what's really going on in 1966, when her first diary that she'd edited with all this withheld information that she'd edited was released. And now she's a star. And I need some quotes and I need some information about what she was really going through. Can you send me some things? And he was like, sure, kablam. And there were things that he was able to send me. So, I mean, I just had a lot of scaffolding. I had a lot of help, people behind me going like, here's some real information on what was really happening deep. She was a deep writer too. Like if you ever read Nin, she just had a way of going deeply into her emotional state. I'll tell you something else. This is a real jump in topic, but it's interesting. My husband's a composer. He writes for media. And he's a composer of some note. Like the last thing he did was Call of Duty, Black Ops, Cold War. And so frequently what he'll ask me to do on those projects is be his lyricist. If he has to write songs, he brings me in to be his lyricist. And for Black Ops 4, he wanted me to write lyrics where I needed to sort of reshape some lyrics that had been written for Black Ops 1, something like that. I needed to sort of reframe some set of lyrics that already existed. And I was feeling stuck creatively. And so I did something I don't usually do. I went to Nin's fiction. I'm not a real fiction like yippee lover. I'm a nonfiction person kind of all the way. Like I don't typically read fiction. Anyway, so I went to her fiction, and her fiction is just this beautiful flight of fancy. You know, it's just evocative imagery, and it takes you somewhere, and it's beautiful. And I sat in a chair, and I read her fiction for about half an hour to an hour, and then I made this shift, and I was in the right place, and I was able to write lyrics for this piece that my husband needed. So she takes you somewhere.
Yeah.
And she led me in the right direction. Reading her unexpurgated diaries helped me get into the right emotional frame of mind to not just write lyrics for her story, but also like create a musical bed to communicate her emotional states. So it was all about her. She led me.
Wow. That's so interesting. That's so interesting how sort of like the way science builds on science, how we sort of move forward. We're also moving forward creatively by listening to things that have happened in the past, listening, hearing, and responding, and building new works.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So what's up next for you? You've got an opera coming. Is that your only focus, or are you seeing beyond that also?
Well, yeah, I mean, right now it's just going to be, I mean, building a VR opera is extremely non-trivial.
Yeah,
It's really a big undertaking. And I am, I really see the next 9 months at least heavily involved in that, because it's not going to just be for me. It's not going to just be the composition part of it. Part of the joy of it for me is going to be, I'm going to want to like look under the hood and tinker with the code and some of the software stuff. And beyond that, Janet and I are always looking for like, what's the next subject matter going to be? And you saw in that clip that we have a couple of ideas going forward, and we are thinking about that, and we're building some things. So we're always a couple ahead in the pipeline. Like, what are we doing next? The Vashti thing's kind of interesting, because if you know anything about Vashti, she's a figure from Jewish theology, and she doesn't really have much of a story. Like, she comes from the Purim story, and it's the story of Queen Esther. It's kind of the light and frothy Jewish holiday where people dress up and everyone drinks a lot, and by the end of the holiday, by the end of the evening of the holiday, you're supposed to have had so many drinks, you're not supposed to know the difference between the heroes and the villains. Yeah. And the kids dress up, and it's the one holiday where the name of God is not in the story. Mm-hmm. I used to be a cantor, so I had some experience with chanting on this particular holiday. And usually when you chant, you open the Torah and it opens like this. And on this holiday, you open a thing called the Megillah. Like, I'm sure people have heard of like the whole Megillah. Well, the Megillah is the story of Purim, and you open it this way, like a proclamation. And in the story, Vashti is this character who is the original wife of the king, and the king is having this big feast, and the feast goes on for, I don't know, a week or more. And one of the things that happens very early in the story is that the king asks his queen Vashti to dance naked for all the men, and she says no. And so she's banished from the kingdom because she's bad. And that's it for Vashti. Then the next thing that happens in the story is that the king looks for the next wife, and all the beautiful women from all over the kingdom come, and then the most beautiful one is Esther, and he doesn't know it, but she's Jewish, and It's a whole story about Esther and how she's Jewish, and then there's the mean guy Haman, and he hates the Jews, and you read the story yourself. It's a whole thing, and so Vashti is barely mentioned at all. And usually when you dress up for Purim, most of the kids dress up as like, Esther or Esther's uncle Mordecai, and those are the good people in the story. And I was always fucking Vashti. And my daughter would be like, Mom, why are you Vashti? Don't you want to be Esther? I'm like, no. I love Vashti. She was little, and I'm like, when you grow up, you'll see. And she's such a raging feminist. My daughter now, she's like, I get it. And so Janet and I are always like, we're going to build a whole narrative around Vashti's story and why she said no and what happened to her. And, and she is this like kind of awesome, barely, just this oblique reference to Vashti. She's just barely got a story, but we're going to we're going to bring in a really good writer, and we're going to work with this writer to kind of build a narrative around Vashti. We kind of love Vashti, and we want to elevate her story. So that's Vashti. Like, that's kind of like what we're thinking about next. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Like, yeah, exactly. Bringing her up, building her narrative. How interesting. Mm-hmm. So that's cool. So when you go back to Los Angeles, what do you think you're going to find there? Is it, what's the vibe there?
Oh God. Good question. I mean, my husband, I think, is way more looking forward to going home than I am. He's like, yay, we're going home. I'm like, I don't know. I mean, like, vaccinations are going to be good because I would really like to see my family.
Yeah.
You know, my dad's in his early 80s, and I would really like to squish my dad, and my stepmother, who I adore, and my siblings. You know, I don't really know though. I mean, I have an app that's on my phone that's part of, like, I have a Ring doorbell, you know, and I get an app saying, you know, so and so was shot, somebody was killed near blah blah blah, and it's just, for me, the whole gun culture of America is just disturbing and upsetting, and not the way it was. You know, I guess there were always guns, but it was never like AR-15s, and it was never this many guns in so many hands, and it was never so venerated and exciting for people. I mean, I guess that there's a part of me that is supposed to want to go back. Somebody says, I picked up these books from Strand years ago. Henry Miller also has a beautiful affair with a woman named Brenda. Book called Dear Brenda. Also check out Alice Prynne, also known as Kiki de Montparnasse. She was also very popular among the artists in the 30s. The 7 Addictions and 5 Professions of Anita Berber. Amazing. Oh, that's so cool. Thank you, Dee Dee. Very cool. But I lost my train of thought. Because that was definitely a squirrel moment.
Los Angeles gun culture, coming home.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I come from a family where, you know, we are very engaged politically. And I like telling this story that my dad, when he was 25, I was born in Washington, D.C. My whole family, Washington, D.C. I mean, we all live in L.A. now, but my parents were D.C. people, and all three of my siblings and I, all three of us were born in D.C. And in 1963, my father was at the March on Washington, and he was there for the I Have a Dream speech. And this was the culture that I was raised in. And, you know, we're very passionate about politics in America, and righteousness and justice, and being active, and, you know, and it's hard for me to kind of get my head around, like, going back home and just, you know, continuing to like fight the fight. And I think that being home with my family will help me want to get re-engaged. I mean, I still read the news every day. I'm still very, you know, aware of what's going on in politics at home. And I can tell you that, as particularly my father and my brother are encyclopedic in their knowledge of American history, and, you know, like the history of the Supreme Court, and the you know, the important cases in the court, and what happened in what important things happened in every, you know, presidential administration, and who the vice presidents were. And I mean, they're just, you know, there's a rich depth of knowledge in my family that I don't necessarily possess, but that's the milieu that I came from. And the idea that, oh, I ran away to Portugal is just kind of like, I have like mixed feelings about it. But on the other hand, I feel like I want to be in a non-gun culture. I don't like the constant, you know, pings that I'm getting from my phone saying there was another shooting 2 blocks from your house. It just is worrisome and upsetting. And I like living in a place where people are more rational, where there's a single reality. The single reality here is there's a virus, and if you wear a mask, it's going to spread less. Like, that's the one reality where I'm staying in Portugal. And, you know, we go for a walk on the beach. The winds are 15 miles an hour. You know, the chances that somebody's going to, like, blow their, you know, virus in your face are pretty slim. And yet everyone's wearing a mask.
Yeah.
No one's going, hey, my liberty. No one. there's a sense of, oh, other people in the world, I'm going to treat them with dignity. I'm going to be concerned about others. Like there's a sense of taking care of one's fellow man here. Like the way I remember America being when I was younger.
Yeah.
You know, I just, I've been, not physically attacked, but verbally attacked at home. You know, somebody was wearing their mask under their nose because they're a genius. And I was at the post office, and I was standing pretty far away from them. And somebody said, "Are you in line?" And I very sotto voce, I said, "Yeah, I am in line. I just don't want to stand too close because the way the guys." And the guy turned around and he said, "Is there some kind of fucking problem?" He just was completely in my face, super aggressive. And I just said, "You're wearing your mask incorrectly, and I don't want to get sick." And he said, "I'm not sick." And I said, "You don't know that." And he said, "What are you, some kind of fucking doctor?" And I said, "You don't know anything about me." And he said, "You must be a Democrat." You know, and it was just like, ugh.
Yeah.
Go away.
Yeah.
This is in Southern California.
Yeah.
We're supposed to be all groovy there, you know?
You mentioned, yeah, indeed. I know it's funny because there are these, as you said, like these dual realities. At what point do you think the split began in the U.S.?
I don't know. I think it probably happened, you know, long before Trump. I think Trump exacerbated the situation. I mean, I think a lot of people pinpoint, you know, Reagan as sort of the beginning of the schism. I don't know. I mean, I think we live in these information silos.
Yeah.
And I think that I can't remember what that. I wish my husband was here. He could remind me what the fairness doctrine. I think when the fairness doctrine went away, that created these information silos. That when we stopped having like equal access to information, that information started being a choice instead of like, here are the facts, we're going to lay them out, and then we're going to have different interpretations of the facts. That's when things started going south. And I think that the fairness doctrine ended with Reagan.
Yeah.
I believe. I could be wrong, but I think that's right.
Yep.
So I think that might be when.
I think that is a key piece. Do you think that's something that can come back, or is it once it's out of the bag, it's gone? Like, can we regain the reins?
I don't know. I wish I understood more about political policy. I listen to a lot of policy wonky podcasts. I don't like, I'm very, like I said, I'm like nonfiction person, and I'm not a fiction person at all. So I listen to a lot of that stuff because I really admire people who understand the nuts and bolts of how everything works. And I admire that, but I can't really, I'm not good at opining. Like, you know, what they could do is they could, you know, like the House could put this kind of bill up for a vote. I really don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, if we could try to bring back the fairness doctrine, I think that would make a difference, but I have no idea whether that's something that would even have a chance in the House to pass. And right now I'm saying we as meaning the Democrats right now, that is how I identify myself. We have the power. We just passed this, you know, this rescue package. You know, the Senate stayed up all night. They debated, and then Kamala Harris came in and she gavelled it in, and she you know, she was that 51st vote, and that went through. So maybe something like that could happen with the fairness doctrine, but I'm not really sophisticated enough to know.
Yeah. I think that most Americans are not sophisticated enough to know also how things work. I think that people know bits and pieces of how they think things work. And I think that's part of the problem, is that there's just a huge disconnect between what happens in Washington and how it filters out into these states, which are, you know, thousands of miles away.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Civics lessons not happening enough. People don't understand how their government works.
Yeah, exactly. So
including me.
Yeah. I mean, it is
that makes sense. Yeah.
But it is a complicated thing. But we have learned a lot recently. We've learned a lot about public health recently. We've learned a lot about how things can come undone by leadership, at least recently. I used to kind
Yes.
of believe that there were like checks and balances. And so but you see that those checks and balances are really culture, not fact.
Yes. Who knew?
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we've been talking for over an hour, and I have a feeling like we could be
Wow.
talking for a couple more hours because you are super interesting and you're smart and you're sharp and you know about all these things and you've got just tons of things to say and share with us. So thank you for joining me today for this great conversation.
Thank you. So fun.
Yeah, totally fun. It was great to like see you in Portugal. But I want to ask you before we wrap this up. I've got one final question, and that is, I mean, very clearly to me, you are a superwoman. But I wanted to know what you think. So, what is your superpower?
Okay, my superpower is, and I say this a lot, I can shake the internet and make anything I want fall out of it.
So how do you do that?
I can research and find anything and really get my hands on anything and make shit happen.
All right. Very good. So the internet, one of your tools. Excellent. So you guys, those of you who joined us today on our conversation, thank you so much for coming. It's great to see you there. I hope you guys have a great week. And I'll be back again with the Hannah Judson Beat next week.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, everybody.